Hey there everyone, Noir here and welcome to Fan Theories. Before we begin, if you are new to the series or if you haven't seen Petscop, I would highly suggest pausing this video and watching those first, because throughout this series I will be referring back to previous points I've made to improve upon them. I'll give you a couple of seconds here to do that and you can carry on after you've caught up. Okay, so Easter was a bit of a, shall we say, change in pattern? I expected 17 to appear, but I definitely didn't expect 18, 19, 20 and 21 to appear alongside it. Well, as you can see, this episode is also a deviation from my usual single episode analysis format. Today, I will be analysing 17 to 21, so I'd suggest grabbing a drink and a snack for this one. Let's begin with episode 17, and considering that the last video I made regarding Petscop was from Care to Paul, this episode is quite a breath of fresh air to me. The entire episode is essentially filling in the blanks when it comes to the family, but I would like to note that there were hints towards this episode's arrival date that occurred a couple of weeks prior to its release. The About section of the channel changed twice, and the profile picture changed once. There are only slight differences between the two About sections, with the final sentence being changed. Some select Petscop recordings. In a way, recordings have the power to raise the dead. They're kind of scary. Then the final sentence changed from currently hunting for hidden content to we finished our long Easter egg hunt. I think this is a good time to mention how good the creators of the series are at using imagery and story elements in a way that can have multiple interpretations. Let's look at the latest rendition of the channel page again. The About section first. In a way, recordings have the power to raise the dead has three potential interpretations as far as I can see. 1. It could mean that the episodes are literally assisting in giving life to a ghost, something that's been suggested numerous times by people who run with the theory that the game is haunted. 2. It could mean that the recordings, including the matter of playing the game to create the recordings in the first place, is bringing up repressed memories of Paul and Marvin's past. 3. It's also a possibility that it's a reference to Easter in accordance to Christian beliefs. Jesus Christ died and was resurrected on Easter Sunday. We've finished our long Easter egg hunt has two interpretations. 1. It's a reference to Easter, which would make sense considering the date of the episode's release, and 2. It's a gaming reference. Game developers often hide secrets in their games, which over time became known as Easter eggs. As for the egg in the profile picture, it appears to exist solely for the purpose of coercing people into believing a specific interpretation. Paul has been looking for an Easter egg and has come across a sprite of an Easter egg. This was all done in an effort to mask the true intention of the episode, which has nothing to do with Easter aside from its release date. Now then, onto the episode itself, which starts in the garage just like episode 16 did, meaning that this episode is yet another direct continuation. Paul pauses the game, which holds an interesting line of text in the top right end of the screen. The ghost room is a ship in a bottle. The ghost room's a reference to the room that's being monitored, seemingly where Paul resides. By calling the room a ship in a bottle, this could mean that the room itself is in a metaphorical frozen state. From the reference image that we see in Petscop 16, as well as the description of the room that Raina gave to Belle in Petscop 12, the room itself appears to have its own set of three states: the quitter's room, the ghost room, and the garage. Why do I say the garage is the third state? The chair on the floor. Petscop as a series utilizes various literary tools within its descriptions and its episodes. Alongside subversion and inference, a tool that is heavily used within the series is the rule of three. For anyone who doesn't know what that is, allow me to explain. The rule of three essentially boils down to this: using three of a particular thing, whether it's a statement, characters, locations, etc., is likely to make more of an impact in your story. For instance, a lot of stories tend to focus on three main characters throughout, with the other characters within the story ending up as side characters or throwaway characters, such as the typical hero, villain and captive scenario, the hero, sidekick and the villain, and the band of three heroes. As well as characters, you can also use the tool to help emphasize a particular part of the story that you want people to remember, which Petscop does with the gift plane, the new maker plane and under the new maker plane, the house, the school and the windmill, and the house frozen in time during 3 different dates. Of course, there is also Care AB and NLM, 3 save files, 3 new maker style avatars, 3 people at the windmill, the list goes on and on and on. Moving on, Paul goes to the sound test menu and there are some interesting sound files to note here. Work Zone Level 2, OOC, Girl World, Care Be Cry, Your Calendar, Care Message, Care Says Uh-oh, and Care Says Bye Bye. Work Zone is most likely the ambient music from the school. OOC means out of character. Girl World is probably the jingle that occurs when the avatar moves towards the picture of the girl in Petscop 15. Care Bee Cry confirms that there is actually a Care Bee to find, and Your Calendar will be the red calendar that we saw in both Petscop 10 and Petscop 14, meaning that the chime is for the 2017 calendar. As for Care Message, the reason why it's so interesting is because of where it's situated. It appears in the same vein as Marvin Message and Bell Message, meaning that the new maker avatar that we've been following through this story has officially been confirmed to be Care. The Care Says sound files are interesting for an entirely different reason. They are voice recordings instead of MIDI files. We're actually hearing Care's voice within the game for the first time. Paul spends some time putting in a code to access a new menu. This particular form of input is very familiar to me, considering that I grew up with games that had it as well, like Sonic the Hedgehog games for instance. This menu consists of 3 options: access to all of the previous recordings that the game had made, a level select with a built-in update version system, and one called Extra Stuff that we see in episode 18. But for now, Paul looks at the level select option, which holds some more confirmations. The biggest one on this screen is Anna Office. I'll explain why when I get to it. The next screen has another interesting name, House Gara. Of course, this logically means House Garage, but I believe that the way it is shown here is actually important. More on that later. Paul chooses to load up the house level, specifically on the 10th revision of the game. The map loads and we see multiple avatars roaming around the room, with Paul switching between them periodically. This is further verification that the house is incredibly significant to this story, to the point that regardless of the version that was being played, there is the option to see what people were doing collectively. The house is being monitored more like a security system, but the garage, also known as the ghost room, monitors the room and the real-life subject within it. Paul ventures outside and starts to walk backwards, whilst Raina says, "Hi there. Wake up. You're free." "There you go. Thank you. I want you to retrace your steps. The family, as usual, wants to learn what happened to you between November the 10th and November 12th of 1997. On November the 10th of 1997, you ran away from your daddy's school building, and on the 12th you arrived at your house. The question is, where were you on November the 11th, and what were you doing there? I hope to guide you to that location with a spell, which I will begin now. You are a girl named Carrie Mark, and you were born on November the 12th, 1992. You have a mommy named Anna, a daddy named Marvin, an auntie named Jill, an uncle named Thomas, a cousin named Daniel. I know what you must be thinking. Have these statements always been true, or have I cursed you? Is there such a thing? A curse that changes your past? Stop thinking. You were kidnapped and spent 5 months studying at an abandoned elementary school. You ran away, crying, ashamed, covering your face. You were blind. At some point, your movements stopped making sense. Bumping into walls and doors, dodging invisible obstacles. Find the moment. When were you led astray on the road? So, there's a lot to go through here. What Raina appears to be attempting is something called a cognitive interview, which is a way of helping a subject to remember a particular event in more detail than their conscious mind will allow them to do. Raina informs Paul what they will be trying to uncover during the interview. Where was he and what was he doing the day before he arrived back at his home on his birthday? He then sets up a baseline for Paul by telling him who he really is and some general background information about his family. To avoid breaking Paul out of mentally retracing the event, Raina acknowledges that Paul will have repressed the memory of his past self and assume that he's lying. The reason why Raina says, "Is there such a thing? A curse that changes your past? Stop thinking," is to help Paul understand that he's not trying to make him believe something that isn't true, and it's in his best interest to accept it and not fight it. Lastly, Raina describes what Paul did and how he was feeling during his escape from the school on November the 10th, which would help Paul to remember the event that Raina did not have the answer to. Now then, back to Anna's office. We now know that Anna is Carrie/Paul's mother, and we can finally confirm that it was Anna who received the call about Carrie's disappearance. The question is, what does Anna do? The layout of the room seems to suggest that she's some form of police officer or a detective. But if that was the case, how was she unable to find her daughter after 5 months of being missing in the same location? Especially if Carrie was clearly close enough to be found and brought home in such a short amount of time. Either way, after Raina's question, it cuts to a different area, presumably the area that Carrie ended up, to which Raina says, "A girl went missing around here. Story goes your daddy used to sit on a bench with a birthday cake trying to lure her home. Instead of missing girl signs, he put up birthday girl signs, promising cake to the birthday girl. Of course, the birthday girl never came home, to his disappointment. When I learned about this absurd story, I spent a lot of time digging. Eventually, I found out what really happened to that girl. Want to know? Ask." Paul activates the same question box we saw in Petscop 11 and asks what happened to her. This is the result. Lena Leskowitz, 1968 to 1977. They didn't see her. Now I can finally return to something that I mentioned earlier, House Gara. I can now say with certainty that Garalina means Gara Lena. Raina probably dug up the truth about Lena, which was on the PC in the garage. Also, for those who are unaware, the original post-advertising Petscop on Reddit was made by a user called Peleskowitz, which I believe we can now confirm to mean Paul Leskowitz, the name that Paul adopted, which is Anna Mark's maiden name. The episode ends with Paul returning to the road and proceeding to make his way to the school. I must admit, I assumed that Marvin's wall from Petscop 8 would have been used, but this is fine. This episode focuses on the extra stuff option of the menu. It's essentially the concept art for the game as well as the design process for the sprites themselves. The first one we see is the main avatar sprite, which is actually called a Guardian. Next we see Amber, Randis and Tonith's concepts, which didn't really have much variation to them. However, Pen's design was altered quite heavily, meaning that Raina took a lot of time to decide how he wanted her to look, whereas the others appear to have already gotten their concept at least fleshed out before they were even put into the game. Then we come to Hudson, who has never been mentioned before this episode. This could mean that Hudson was scrapped, or he was never able to be put into the game if we run with the theory that Raina is dead. Let's look at Wavy, who initially appeared to be water rather than a cloud, complete with his own jumping animation. Naturally, this change in design was probably down to the Randis puzzle. We also get to see the full extent of the Gift Plains map, something that we never got to see in the version that ended up in Paul's hands. As you can see, there appear to be 4 notable areas: Even Care, some random hills, a rudimentary skyline, and a single hill. However, there's also something next to Even Care which may have ended up as a new area, but it wasn't finalized. Finally, we see the house, which is the only object within this menu that moves. Perhaps this is due to its significance both inside the game and outside of the game. Something else to note as well here is that this version of the house has no windows, no garage, and no doors. This is what makes me think that the ship in a bottle phrase is referring to the house and the ghost room being in a frozen state. Most of the questions and answers to the story all seem to have unfolded when Paul found the house. It's the metaphorical toolbox which gives Paul a way to figure out how to open doors without actually doing so, solve the Ronith puzzle with the bucket, figure out that his conversations are being monitored, and it even shows him who he really is. This episode shows us the All Recordings option, which gives us a lot of information. First of all, we see that there are recordings all the way up to Game Revision 15, which are apparently saved onto a PlayStation 1 memory card. Okay, I need to call this out. Now, considering that I'm apparently the same age as Carrie/Paul, which is 26 at the time of writing this script, I also grew up with a PlayStation 1. Which means that I'm well aware that a PlayStation 1 memory card was limited to 15 slots, with PlayStation 1 consoles being limited to 2 memory card slots, 30 save slots. If you take into account that Paul has already created his own set of 3 slots, that brings it down to 27, but apparently there are 44 save states on these memory cards. The only way that would be possible on PS1 hardware would be if Paul was using a multi-tap, the PS1's answer to having extra controller ports and memory card ports. So it's possible, but very improbable. The rest of the save states are saved onto the disc itself, which is even more ludicrous considering that PlayStation 1 discs are limited to 650 megabytes. I mean, that's why large games used multiple discs during that time. Not because they wanted to, because they had to. I understand that the game's supposed to be unfinished, but at the same time, it does have 15 revisions of the game within each disc, the ability to make backup saves onto the disc that don't overwrite existing saves, a potential procedurally generated room system which would have to have hundreds of variations to account for each and every single face that's placed onto the canvas in the child library, thousands of textures and sprites for each area and character in the game, a text input system, a controller-based chat system, multiplayer, a texture editor, hundreds of sound files, let alone the coding data needed just to allow it all to function. Anyway, let's chalk it up to artistic license and move on. I've gone way off topic. Something that does link up well is that there are 15 different copies of the game, which we saw in Petscop 14, and if we go based off the noises that each copy gave when they were selected, Paul has the 8th copy. Going further down the list, we start to see various names of previous players, presumably kids that were testing the game. Some of them appear multiple times: Ryan, Phil, Nathan, Megan, Lucas, James, Daisy, Belle, Amber, Robbie, and Mike, who has the most playthroughs out of anyone else from the list. The first state that we see is presumably Rainer testing movement and model collision. Next up, we see an incredibly important recording of Mike's second playthrough, which shows him finding an Easter egg, and we see this text. What? One of those eggs was in Daniel's game? What an unfair trick. Have you found every egg in the office? This confirms what Rainer's real name is. Daniel, Carrie's cousin. Throughout the rest of the video, I will be referring to Rainer as Daniel. Considering how the statement was being portrayed to Mike, it makes it all the more heartbreaking to know that Daniel was originally making the game for a completely different purpose. A fun game for kids like Michael. If we look back at this sentence again, a cousin named Daniel, I think that sentence was originally supposed to say, a cousin named Daniel, and a cousin named Michael. So here's what I think the family tree is. 2 sisters, Lena and Anna Leskowitz. Anna married Marvin Mark, which made her Anna Mark. Marvin's sister, Jill Mark, married Thomas Hammond and became Jill Hammond. Anna and Marvin had a daughter named Carrie Mark. Jill and Thomas had 2 sons, Daniel and Michael Hammond. After Carrie's kidnapping, Anna and Marvin separated, which meant that Anna reverted to her maiden name, and when Carrie became Paul, they changed his name to Paul Leskowitz. Moving on, the rest of the episode shows various players going through what the current version of the game that they're using has to offer. Carrie seems to be perplexed by the Randis and Wavy puzzle, whereas Belle seems to get the hang of it fairly quickly, which gives us the initial descriptions for the pair. Randis is a flower. He does need water, but not as much as he thinks. Shouldn't worry. If you are considering Randis, you should adopt Wavy as well. Wavy knows how to trick Randis. Wavy is a cloud. He's afraid of everything. He's especially afraid of freezing. According to him, he's never the same person for more than a few seconds. So it turns out that we were wrong about who Randis probably represents. It seems more like Randis is Mike, whereas Wavy is still likely to be Daniel. James appears to be struggling with Amber's puzzle. Phil is completely baffled by Ronith. Amber ends up getting trapped in her own pet version's puzzle, and Belle is once again flying through the game. The way that these recordings seem to be laid out makes me believe that one of these particular play sessions is likely to be the same one that Paul mentioned in Petscop 11 when he remembered Daniel. Something else to note as well is that clearly Belle is a different person. So there you go. I know that a lot of people have been wondering whether or not I'm going to end up changing my mind about Belle, Care and Paul all being the same person. That's confirmed it for me. We finally come to Marvin's playthrough of the game. There are some subtle changes to Even Care here, for instance like the locked door just saying this door is locked and stopping there instead of mentioning his inability to open it. He fumbles around trying to catch Ronith, then appears to input the code to enter the new maker plane. We see a much different loading screen than the original screen that we're used to for this. Instead, it depicts an image of a door in Even Care that almost looks like it has glitched. Marvin appears to spend numerous days walking around the new maker plane, all the way up until a fresh version of the game appears. Upon loading his save, the following text appears. Hi Marvin, Raina here. You have to be careful this time. If you start running out there without a sense of purpose, you'll get lost. I'm writing this on July the 10th, 1997, and Care is still missing. We're searching. Last weekend, we almost got lost ourselves. Your search is harder. Beyond here, there are no landmarks, but this model of a brick building, though crude, should still be familiar to you. Where is this building? From here, I want you to find a grave. You know the grave I'm talking about. It's definitely out here somewhere. It's unmarked, of course. That's the trouble. You're the only person who can find it. I increased your speed so you can search faster. At this point, it seems that Daniel's trying to coax Marvin into giving up the location of Michael, but he isn't taking the bait. Moving on to revision 8 of the game, and we see the basement door opening for the very first time. Like the door leading to the new maker plane, this loading screen is also different and even more harrowing. A real photograph depicting Carrie's crayons. The hatch doesn't lead to where we would expect it to. Instead, it leads to a walkway that begins with a sign saying Road Map, then goes on to a room with 4 caskets. One with a chalkboard that apparently contains 5 words that reside in the dirty building that Marvin inhabits. One that shows Marvin and Anna's bedroom, which confirms that the reason for the house being painted black was to cover up Marvin's stencils after Anna kicked him out. The third one, which is supposed to represent Carrie dancing, possibly linking towards Lena and Marvin's obsession with turning Carrie into her. And the final casket holds a vase with a daisy in it, which links to what really happened to Carrie's eyebrows. Marvin was the one who plucked them. These are the 4 censored items. 4 items that show how Marvin tortured his own daughter over his obsession with Lena, how he ended up being kicked out of the house, and how he ended up coming to the decision to kidnap Carrie so he could carry on his torment. But we also learn at this point that Carrie had managed to escape and was safe at home. We then move on to the places of significance: the bench, the house, the school, the windmill, and Michael's grave. The message that appears when Michael's grave is interacted with remains on the screen so it can burn into Marvin's mind that his secret has been uncovered. Frantically, Marvin asks Tool 3 questions. Did you find Lena? Which was originally going to say, did you dig something? Who is your boss? And what year is it? All are answered with the usual I don't know, aside from the last question, which materializes the calendar for 1997. Finally, Marvin uses the camera that watches the windmill, ends up bringing it down to the lower level, and turns it to face the symbol that resides in Evencare's room that connects to Penn's puzzle and Randis's puzzle, which correlates with the living room in the house, specifically the area that holds the door to Carrie's room. Marvin then attempts to quit the game, only for another pause screen to appear on top of his that states, "Your butt leaves a cavity in the chair," which probably means that Daniel knew that Marvin had been in the garage during June the 5th. In spite of this episode seeming to be inconsequential at first glance, just footage of Carrie moving between the 2 signs in the corridor of Evencare that leads to Amber's puzzle, it's actually a lot more than that. Petscop 20 ended on revision 8, and the version that contains this recording is also version 8, which means that it was recorded after Carrie escaped. Considering that we also learned that Carrie was blind by the time she returned home, this footage suggests that her vision was improving or that she was starting to get to grips with her motor skills again. Carrie was recovering and became Paul at some point after this. But if this is where the series ends, it does mean that the loop has not been closed. Logically, the episode that follows this one in the timeline is Petscop 1. However, we did see Paul start making his way to the school in Petscop 17, which may mean that we will see one more episode that closes it once and for all, with the acquisition of Care B and Paul's full recollection of what happened to him, including November the 11th, 1997. And this is where the analysis ends, which also includes Petscop fan theories. This will be my final episode regarding Petscop, and the reason for not continuing is made up of multiple reasons. First of all, I have covered every Petscop episode up until 21, relayed 2 of my own overarching theories, gone through episodes 1 to 16 again in a live stream alongside my survivors, and I think that it's time for me to leave the series alone and move on to other titles that I feel deserve my attention. Titles that in the past I've neglected in favour of Petscop because it got to the point where I was slowly becoming obsessed with it. As I stated earlier this year, I was fully intending on leaving Petscop fan theories at episode 16's analysis, but I decided that I would take one last dive into it, and this was it. Another thing that I've mentioned before in passing when it comes to this series is that I'm a father to 2 young daughters. One is 7 and one is 5, and in spite of how much I try to avoid thinking about it and to not let it get to me, Petscop's story really messes with my mental state. It's a story about young children who are abused, tortured, kidnapped, maimed, and even killed. But because of my fascination with the story's intricacies, I kept going back into it, which has ended up taking its toll on me. So that's the end of Petscop fan theories. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, let me know what your thoughts and theories are in the comments section, And even if you didn't, let me know how I can improve the series for you. Until next time, people, keep on surviving.